don't decide early. The first 15, 20 years, experiment, explore. Wit is important. But what they look for are two, three things. One, fundamentally, is this person driven? Driven means, are you somebody who will take initiative? Are you somebody who will go beyond the brief? Marketing is not creative. It is not. Right? Marketing is business, which is, are you here to solve consumer problems in a profitable and sustainable way?
Hey there, welcome to Marketing Mavics with Indiefolio. Today we have Ashwath Swaminathan with us. Ashwath's career spans over 2 decades, where he started off learning physics and then decided that he wants to switch to marketing. He then spent 17 years in Unilever, where he managed a lot of iconic brands. His last stint was as the Chief Growth and Marketing Officer at Swiggy. Ashwath's probably marketed products which you've used. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of people have used the products he's marketed, and I'm very excited to unpack his journey, ask him a lot of questions about marketing, which a lot of young marketeers can also find very useful. Hey Ashwath, thanks for your time and welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Kavan. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm really excited to have this chat with you. We've been trying to set this up for a while, but I understand. I think I'm joining you in your break right now. You just I think had your last day at Swiggy 2 or 3 weeks ago. So thank you for making time. I'm very excited to actually unpack your journey first. And the first question I had for you is, when did you decide that you want to build a career in marketing? Because from what I know, I think you did physics and you were learning that, and then you decided somewhere there that you want to join Mica and then build a career there. So what was in your mind that time, and why did you make the jump?
Okay, interesting. Actually, marketing happened a bit serendipitously. At heart, I think I'm a researcher. That's where I specialized at Mica, and that was my first job at a research agency called TNS. And then the opportunity at HUL came, which was again in the insights division. And I joined the beverages and ice cream team. And I used to partner the tea, coffee, and ice cream businesses. And in coffee is a local jewel business in India. Unilever doesn't have that business anywhere else. So all the mix creation work also used to happen locally. And I was very closely involved. And it so happened that the brand manager on Brew at that point, she wanted to take a break and move on. And it just happened. And I don't know what, I don't recall what was the switch in my head, but I remember going up to the category head and saying, "Hey!" And normally in HUL, the brand managers fill back with another area sales manager who's ready in line next, etc. That's usually the drill. But when I went and asked, saying, "Do you think I can take a shot at this?" I almost expected like an interview, something, and a day later they came back and said, actually, yeah, we're happy to have you. And I was a bit surprised but equally delighted. So yeah, it just happened like that, saying I was so closely involved in the brand, why don't I just see what is on the other side? But I think since then, no looking back. I just love solving consumer problems, and yeah, that's where I want to be.
I wanted to ask you, what's your advice for a lot of people who are maybe doing engineering or they've just finished their 12th, who maybe know what they don't like, but they have no clue what they like. So I believe you were in a similar situation. So what did you do there?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and through lots of candidates I've met over the last couple of decades in interview processes, campuses, etc. I think one thing is I see a pattern. Youngsters these days actually are a lot more clear on what they want to do. And I think, like you said, when I remember starting out, I was clear what I didn't want to do. Actually, I didn't want to do engineering, and the reason was pretty shallow. I didn't want to spend 4 years in college. I didn't want to spend the whole day in college. I wanted to do physics, which I liked, and I wanted to spend 5 hours leaving time for some sport. I was playing basketball and tennis back then, so that's what I wanted to do. So it didn't start with the plan that I will graduate, do an MBA, and then get to X career. So, but I think the youngsters these days are a lot more clearer on what they want to do. But my advice is, don't decide early. The first 15, 20 years, experiment, explore. Wit is important, so that then you get into the depth of specialization where now you know what you're really good at and go after it. And clearly, two things you should keep in mind what are the areas that interest you, what drives you, gets you out of bed, saying, hey, this is a problem. No matter how bad the days are, you still want to get out of bed saying, I want to tackle that problem. So I think that's the first criteria. And the second is, do you have some competence, skill, to excel at it? If the two match, obviously that's the best combination.
Fantastic. Um, Talking about a journey, you said you worked in a research company, then you went with one of the bigwigs, one of the dream companies for a lot of marketers. You spent 17 years there. A lot of people maybe, wanting to kind of follow a similar path. They'll be wanting to go to a Unilever. How did you make the cut, right? Like today, if I was really aspiring to join a company like that, what do people there look for in marketers?
Yeah, interesting. Again, it wasn't a plan. I didn't, go into my research job thinking about what my next job was. Right? I went into research saying this is what I love doing, and hopefully keep growing. And when the opportunity came, the interesting part, firstly, was I kept interacting with clients as a researcher, and then the curiosity was piqued on how are they consuming this information to decide and take decisions, and therefore implement in their marketing plans or products, etc. So that curiosity was sort of awakened then. And when actually came through a friend that there is an opening, are you interested? And I said, yeah. And frankly, at that point, I didn't realize the bigness of HLL as it was called then, not even HUL, till you get in. That's when you realize it's actually many companies in one, and that's the joy of working there because you get so many different category exposures. But what they look for are two, three things. One, fundamentally, is this person driven? Driven means, are you somebody who will take initiative? Are you somebody who will go beyond the brief? Do things not just because somebody's asked you to do. You want to wake up out of bed with motivation internally. I think that's the first thing. Second is, are you somebody who is got ability to simplify the complex and just structure problem solving, analytical ability combined with a bit of intuition, to be able to sharply define problems and able to crystallize. And very often it's easy to get lost in data and lots of information, but are you able to simplify it is the second thing. And the third, I think they look for is, do you have a bit of imagination? And I don't mean creativity from, are you a creative person? Can you write great ideas and scripts? But do you have imagination to imagine solutions which are not, you know, probably out of the box, which are a bit out of the box? Can you think unconstrained solutions? And I think obviously different people come with different strengths on these three parameters. But if you meet a minimum bar on all three and obviously excel at least on two out of those three, then you have a great shot of getting in there and succeeding in.
I want to touch upon that, for a lot of people when they're deciding if I want to join marketing or not, some think marketing is like you have to be highly creative, you have to make ads with celebrities and do performance, etc. And then there's the other end of people, especially with Martech doing so well, that data research is critical and you need to be very analytical, create these attribution engines and really kind of show how it's impacting revenue today. And creative people are like, यार मुझे वो अच्छा नहीं लगता है, and then vice versa, with the analytical side. So how do I really know, if I'm the right person for marketing, right? Is creativity very important? Is analytics more important? Are they equal, or is one lopsided over the other?
No, interesting question. I think first let me debunk the myth. Marketing is not creative. It is not, right? There are creative folks, advertising agencies, creative people, people like you and your teams who do that partnering, right? And so that's not marketing. I think marketing, first thing that I learned and I've been telling people is, marketing is business, which is, are you here to solve consumer problems in a profitable and sustainable way? And the advertising is a means to that end. Ultimately you're here because, and if you think of all startups, that's what they start with, right? Saying, I found a consumer problem, I experienced it, I wanted to solve it, so I launched this service. More often than not, they felt it themselves personally, and then you know that bug bit them and they decided to start up. But that's where it starts. And then, and can I do that profitably, create value for consumers and the enterprise combined? And then the advertising, the performance marketing, the media planning are all means to that end. I think so. That's important to understand. And therefore, what are the important traits? Goes back to what I said. First is data is important because information assimilation is very very critical, right? In because there is lots of information, and if you're not somebody who can handle it, that's you can't rely on your gut alone. But you need that analytical ability to synthesize data, assimilate it, to tell the signals from the noise. I think that's an important first trait. Second is then being able to have empathy because data ultimately is the front end of what is happening at consumers' lives at the back. Behavioral patterns. Can I then say what is happening behind that data and empathize to say, okay, this is the behavior that's explaining, this data pattern. And the third is not creativity, but like I said, is imagination. Once I define the problem, am I able to say, here's what I can do with it? I may not come up with the idea, but I should be able to brief somebody saying, can you do something interesting with this? Is important, but that imagination is important. So I think all of these are important, but different people have spikes on one or two of these areas differentially, right? So, and that you'll find, and that's like any other career or even a sport. Sometimes you're good with the cover drive, you're not so good with the square cut. Everyone has their strengths. So, but that doesn't mean you're a bad batsman or not. You're a good batsman with some strength. So you're a good marketer with areas that you spike on. So I think that's the way that I would think of the three things. You should have a minimum standard on all three and be able to spike on one or two, I think.
I want to now touch upon Unilever, where you've been there for about 17, 18 years. It's a place where a lot of people kind of aspire to be. So today, everybody's like, yeah, uh, working in a company for more than 2 years or 3 years is like unimaginable for a lot of young folks, and being there for 7 years is incredible, which means that you were constantly learning, you were constantly growing, you were constantly being challenged. And I think that's a really great trait of working in a large company like that. So um, today when I'm, let's say, graduating from my college, while there are the usual Unilevers of the world, there are also a lot of startups who hire directly, from campus. And as somebody who's just starting on their career, do you think it's better to kind of work in a large company first, or is it better first to work in a startup?
I mean, the obvious answer, Kavan, is there is no one size fits all rule, right? Whatever works for any individual. Like, I'll give you an example. My dad passed out of IMA in 1977. He said he attended the campus placement interviews, but went straight out of campus and started his own business. And but that was him. But most people and his batch, I keep joking, has a lot of very very high profile corporate folks who we all know, but he's not one of them. But I said, he said, no, I chose to do my business, and that's fine. So I think even though he came from that pedigree, he was somebody who decided to start up back then in the 77 era. Whereas everybody, many of them in his batch, obviously went on to do large corporate careers and very successfully. I don't think there's a judgment on one or the other. So I don't think there's any thumb rule. It's about what you want to do. But obviously, both have their pros and cons. I think established large companies offer, think of them as institutions. You get to learn a lot more. So they've got success, they've made mistakes, and therefore you go there. It's like college again, except that you're learning by doing, and you're learning from people who've done things successfully, made a lot of mistakes, and therefore can teach you. Whereas
Right.
when you go to a younger company, they're learning themselves. So you're in the process of somebody who's saying, I'm learning along with others in the organization. I'm not going there to learn from somebody. And if you're okay with that, that's perfectly fine, I think. And there are people who say, hey, learning for me comes from live action. And there are some people who say learning for me comes from people above me who know it better. So I think the two are, but what's important is ultimately that whether the values of that company, whether small or big, align with what you ultimately want in life. And as long as that fit is great, I think then you can survive, whether small or big, for a long time. And the other important thing is, and this one of my VPs told me in my career, and there's a lot of, like you said, in HL, lots of people every 2 3 years get restless, saying, "What's the next role I want to move to?" And he advised saying, "But entrepreneurs don't get bored with their jobs, right? Like we all know business people, they keep doing the same business for their entire lifetime. They don't get bored. And you just have to keep finding interesting problems, new problems to solve that will grow your business. And if you stay tuned that way, saying this is my business, it just so happens that it's invested in by a company and some other shareholders, it's not your own money. But if you think of it like that, then the chances that you'll get bored and say, hey, I need rotation, you're here for long term value creation. Life is frankly a test cricket, right? It's not T10 or T20. So as long as you think about it that way, I think then you get less restless and you're happy to. And value creation happens frankly over long periods of time, not in 1 2 years or 3 years.
Absolutely. I want to ask you now, how did you feel, joining a Swiggy after a Unilever? Was there a drastic difference? How did you prep yourself to actually, make such a decision in the first place?
Great question. I'm just going to counter my own analogy on Test cricket and T20 just now. So I actually said, look, I've done a lot of the Test cricket. I've played, in the big arena, the FMCG category. I've seen various categories. I've done that, and here the place that was heating up, and it was this the tech world, the service world, and food tech and QCOM were all heating up. And I said, okay, maybe that's a muscle that I won't. It's not something that'll be first in HUL, right? It'll get acquired later. It's not the best place for me to build that muscle. So that's when I said, okay, if I don't experiment now, when do I? So that's how I took that chance when the opportunity came my way to say maybe this is the time to try something new. And the second, I thought the mission that the founders defined was interesting, to say let's make urban Indians' lives far more convenient. Can we keep adding joy by offering unparalleled convenience? I thought that was interesting because convenience is a vector that can never be enough. You can keep getting more and more convenience in some way. So those were the two things, that one was personal to say, can I build a new muscle? The other was, like I said, the company's mission, which made me say, let's give it a shot.
I know there is a very conventional advice which goes that if, let's say, a company wants to hire a CXO, um, they'll get somebody who has deep expertise in a certain industry or a category or a product, and so and so. Um, I've had the privilege to talk to a lot of CMOs like you through this podcast, and I often see that doesn't happen quite often, right? Like, yeah, like in your example, you are, you're in a food tech company, and from in the past, like while you've obviously done a bunch of things, I wouldn't traditionally say that, hey, they'll pick up somebody from a Unilever. Maybe Swiggy would be like, hey, I'll go to a tech platform, a marketplace, an aggregator, etc., etc. Um, how do companies really decide this, and is specialization really important? Because let's say today, if I'm a CMO, do I do multiple industries, B2B, B2C, India, outside other markets? Or do I be like, no, I love, let's say, BFSI, and I'm going to stick to doing that only. Maybe one day I'll be CMO. So again, I know there is no right answer or wrong answer here. But
Yeah.
how should one think about, as a young marketer, specialization versus versatility?
I think it goes back to one of the earlier questions, right? Early in your career, wit is great, because that's when you're still agile, in the mode of learning. And why do all schooling and education and traditional wisdom says finish that and then start working, right? Because that's when you're most nimble and your brains are best placed for learning. So do that early in your year, because when you get that width of experience, you will know what you like, what you're good at. And like I said, that combination, ideally you want to do something that you like and you're good at. It'll be a travesty if there's something you like and you're not good at, but mostly doesn't happen as long as you put in the right effort behind it. So I think early in the stage in your career, with after 20 years, start going deeper into a domain would be my advice. Obviously, people after that also, I don't know, there was a video I watched recently of Jack Ma, and he was giving this advice. I think he was speaking somewhere. He said the first 10 years in your career, find a nice boss, right? Work for the right people. The next 10 years in your career, experiment and learn. Then after 20 years, he said, now it's your time to give back. Now do what you're good at. Then
Hmm.
the last 10 years, he said, yeah, no, so the next 10 years, do what you're good at. The last 10 years, which is 50 to 60, he said, then it's time to give back, which is you've got to teach, groom teams, teach people, etc. And then he said 60 or not, spend time with your grandchildren. That was his advice. So if you think about it like that, I thought it made sense.
I now want to ask you about customer insights. Probably in your last 20 years, I think you've marketed products that have touched hundreds of millions of people, and really varied sets of products with varied sets of people. Any consumer insight while you were in Unilever or while you were in Swiggy, which you'd like to share with us, because you've been at scale, and I'd love to know if you can share any insights there of how customers have changed or any insight around that.
Oh, many. And yeah, obviously many such insights. And let me think of a couple that come to mind. One was my early stint in tea. I used to work on a brand called Taza. It's a brand of tea popular in the north of India. And as the name suggests, it's all about refreshment. And you should see the brand's advertising from the 80s when it was launched. It was always about physical refreshment, right? And actually, the ad literally shows a woman dancing, getting tired, then and you can see her hair, she's sweaty, then she has a cup of tea, and then the tea refreshes her, her hair is back in place, and then she continues dancing. Basically, that the tea gives you energy to keep doing what you love to do. Made sense. And if you think about that, back then in the 80s, physical demands on the homemakers in UP, etc., were very high because they were doing all the chores themselves, right? So there was clothes, washing dishes, cooking, kids, managing the household, everything was them. So physical demands were higher. But cut to the 2000s, when you've got gadgets, you've got help for other things in your house. You ask women, what is bothering you today? It's physicality. She said, I've gotten stronger. There are things that can help me. There's washing machine, there's help for stuff. What is bothering me is mental. It's the stress that I use tea as a way to get over. I need that refreshment. So the chai se dimag khul jata hai is the thing that they say. And that became an interesting thing, saying, yeah, from being a tea that was about physical refreshment, we need to transition to a tea that's about mental refreshment. And really, that unlocked a lot of growth. And then we started finding moments when that mental refreshment was most important. And there was a ad we did which really turned the brand around in terms of market share. It was declining, by the way, when I joined the brand. For a decade, it was losing share, losing volume, growing only because of pricing and inflation, etc. But it was fundamentally losing consumer franchise. The insight there was at 4 o'clock in the evening, typically after the child comes back home, the woman sits with her child for doing either some tuition coaching with them or homework. And she says that is very important to me because if you think about one level higher, their ticket out of their current quality of life is their child's education. The better the child's educated, more likely that he or she will get to a good job and therefore more prosperous life. So for me, that's really important. I want to be 100% focused on my child at that time and not have 20 things in my head, which is कि वो किया कि नहीं, गैस ऑफ हुआ कि नहीं, रात का खाना बन गया कि नहीं. So I don't want all that. So they say that tea really clears my mind. And that was such an aha moment. And when we did the ad, and the creative then came up with a amazing line where the child asked the mother, saying, "माँ आप इतना ध्यान क्यों लगाते हो?" So then she says, "बुद्धू, इसको नहीं पता कि एग्जाम सिर्फ उसका नहीं, मेरा भी है." And that's why Taza refreshes you because it's as much a reflection of me as it is of the child. And I thought that was quite a nice creative interpretation. By the way, now again goes back to that. I didn't come up with that creative line. My job was to find the human
Correct.
truth, brief the creative person who then came up with the magical line and executed it brilliantly that worked. So
On insights, like, you know what you just mentioned is something so specific, right? Like, I try to imagine, like, how do you really find these insights? I mean, at your scale, how many customers will you talk to? How many customers will you observe, right? So, what's the process of finding an insight which actually, works?
great question. Insights are, I mean, the definition of insight is it's obvious on hindsight. Right? You don't know it till you later figure out, yeah. So I think it's not standing there in obvious places for you to pick up. Consumers will not tell you the insight. It's for you to deduce and decode. And I think the process is like I started. It's you do the data analysis, you figure out where the root cause of the issue is, but then you have to keep meeting customers and consumers and talk to them about their lives. And I think that's the trick that many people miss. When they go and talk to consumers, customers, they go talk to them about your brand or your product. आप ताज़ा क्यों नहीं खरीदते हो, आप कौन सी चाय यूज करते हो, ये क्यों नहीं खरीदते हो, इसमें क्या कमी है, you know then it's a very rational conversation. And most people, if you ask me what tea I use or what coffee I use, I'll give you rational answers. But wherein the conversation, when you switch it to the life of the consumer, you should see they open up their talk. It's like me, you're asking me about my life, right? Look at me talking, versus if you were asking me about my brand of tea or toothpaste, or it's going to be a very different conversation. I think life conversations, because I knew that the domain was about refreshment. Where is refreshment important? When I asked her about that, that's how this moment was surfaced and unearthed. So I think keep talking to customers, keep talking to them about their lives, not about your product, would be my tip to be able to unearth
That's
these insights. I'll
actually
give you another
brilliant
example
advice,
on green tea.
Huh.
Because that green tea example was useful. We were building the green tea category. Say what's the role, and green tea about a little over a decade ago, was already growing. It's a very small category, but there was a lot of buzz around the category because seen as great for health, great for weight loss, and so then that weight loss triggered me and my ABM. We went and met like 10 different women. Wasn't a lot, so 10 women. We talked to them about their weight loss journeys. Why? What do they do? What is the motivation? And the number of interesting stories that we got then became fertile, spaces for insights, which we then leveraged in communicating the proposition, saying you can lose 2 kgs in 3 months if you switch from chai, which has a lot of calories because of milk and sugar, to green tea. That's so much better for you, and it really worked. So I think that's another example to illustrate the point, that talk to them about their life, not about your product.
It's actually a very, very amazing insight. Like I've never thought of it from this point of view. Because even when it comes to B2B, I do marketing and sales for my indie folio, and always asking clients ki, what do you want us to work on is always hard. But if you kind of work from the perspective of what's troubling you in your life today, I think that's a really nice
Yes.
approach to actually get an insight. Otherwise, it becomes very
Yeah.
tactical. And
Yeah.
yeah, you get ghosted, or you just get very random answers which don't really, you can't really build upon. So I absolutely love that. Another thing I wanted to check with you is, there's a growth in the term growth, with marketing now, where everybody's like, it needs to attribute to sales, monetization, and retention, and repeat is also something very important. And you know, um, like it's maybe a immature thought, but when we discuss things like this between, let's say, founders, they often say that your marketing will get you your first customers, but your repeat use will come if your product is great. And it's very hard to influence repeat use if your product doesn't have a bite. However, retention, repeat use is becoming a core metric for a lot of people now, especially in marketing too. And marketing is the first department where they cut losses when times are not very good. And that's why I think more and more pressure is going to them to be answerable, right? So how in your experience, how have you solved for, let's say, repeat user retention leveraging marketing activities?
No, great question. And again, I want to start by saying that retention and product and pricing are as much part of marketing. It's not a separate thing, right? It's how do I market that solution better, is to first, like you said, make sure that the product and the pricing are spot on. And I'm using product slash service depending on what you're ultimately selling interchangeably. And you have a pricing because ultimately you're monetizing it, right? Otherwise, it's a not for profit organization. This is, we're talking, everyone's running an enterprise that ultimately should deliver profit. So those are the two P's that are super critical, and that determines your retention rate. And in classic product cases, you look for a certain 30-35% kind of retention rate, saying that's the minimum that is good. If it is way below, if 1 in 10 people are only staying back after trying it, then it's too much of a leaky bucket, right? Because you'll spend lots of money recruiting new consumers, but 10% of them will stay back. The rest 90 will say, I don't like it, either because the product's not good enough, or because the pricing is not right. So
Hmm.
that is the best and only way, frankly, to drive better retention. And the second thing is, I think this loyalty, now there are enough evidence and science behind it that to build loyalty is a bit of a myth, because every category has a certain defined level of loyalty. And I'll give you a couple of examples, maybe extremes. I used to work on oral care, and every consumer you meet on oral care, you ask them what toothpaste you use, they'll tell you X or Y brand, and they'll tell you with all conviction that this is the brand I've been using for the last 5 8 years. I've been very loyal to this brand. But then, and here's the empathy angle. That's what consumers tell you. But then you go back to data, and you find that 65% of consumers for any brand are non-core, which means they're using two, three other brands apart from that brand. And it's not that consumers are lying. What they're telling you is, I mentally love this brand, but I have two, three other brands in consideration, and I keep switching between those for
Right.
some reason or the other. Whether something's available, something's on deal, I felt like a different flavor, right? And you will realize this now. Go back and observe your toothpaste behavior now for the next few months. What you thought was your most often, which will be your most often, but three times in the year there'll be some other toothpaste without you thinking like you want to cheat on your favorite brand. It just happens, right? So, and now that's a data pattern that we saw very different from what consumers were telling us. Now, does that mean you try and go build greater loyalty? The answer is no, because there is that loyalty, and we did this, studied this across different brands, the biggest brand, the smallest brand. The pattern was broadly the same, and it therefore says the way to get growth is not to try and get more and more loyalty, is to get more and more new users, keep getting light users into the category, into your brand. Because when you have a decent retention rate, which is the first, the product market fit, or PMF as they call it, saying as long as you have that decent retention rate, it tells you that people like your product, value it well. So you keep now go getting trial after it. I think so. That's the way I think about loyalty. There is a category, and the other extreme example could be in the world of commerce and apps, right? Everybody, not everybody, lots of people have multiple apps for the same need. Let's say for food delivery, many people will have a Swiggy and a Zomato. And the popular belief or thing to think about is people might keep looking on both, whichever has a better deal. That's what I'll go buy. There are some consumers who do that. But the bigger thing, and if you think about yourself, is there is your dominant first go to app. It's muscle memory. If you want food, you're more likely to either first open Swiggy or Zomato, depending on the city you live in and the strength of the brand in that
Right.
city. Very high loyalty. It's very hard to shift that loyalty. It shifts. You are likely to experiment when something in the service breaks, or the restaurant you're looking for is either not available, or the item you're looking for is not available, or the delivery time is too large. And then you'll say, okay, or you feel I might get a better deal. Then you tend to look where, so the inertia to change, I wouldn't call it loyalty, I just call it inertia to change, is very high, because I've been doing this, there's nothing wrong, why should I change? So two
Right.
different examples on loyalty.
Awesome. I think I love it's pretty contrarian. A lot of people are really trying hard in their customer journey. That loyalty is like the end goal you want to reach, that they become
Correct.
loyal people. But I agree. I think especially in the kind of categories you spoke, it's very hard. Like I remember once, I recently got married, and my wife just came and changed the toothpaste. And I didn't even realize for the next 3 weeks, that I'm I'm actually using something else entirely different. So it's absolutely true. You mentioned about the marketing piece. I there was a time when there were four. Now there are seven. People are now saying there are nine. With personalization being added, participation being added. Do you think marketing is becoming more and more complex? And do you feel that it's very demanding now for a marketer to kind of do all of it, or do you think we'll enter a world where every P will have an expert and they'll all come together as a unit?
Interesting. Is it getting more complex? I think people are complicating it. Yes, I think we are. And in complication, there is business opportunity, right? So there are people who complicate it and make money off it. कि ये अलग से करना चाहिए, अलग से करना चाहिए, and that is That's happening for sure. Is it needed? I don't think all of it is good complexity, because there is some good complexity and there is some bad complexity. It's like cholesterol in your body. You have to constantly ask yourself what's the good cholesterol, what's the bad cholesterol, and what do you want to keep. I think the good complexity is the fact that, and I'll take India as a market, right? It's very diverse. Gone are the days to think one solution will work across the country, across consumer segments. You will have to find tweaks, whether it's a product business, and across all the categories I've worked on, we've seen that whether it's tea, like brands like Taza, Red Label, Taj Mahal in the HUL portfolio are one brand, but they have different blends for different states based on the preference of that the people in that state. Because some people, like if you go more up north, there's a certain preference for kadak chai, there's a certain kind of color, whereas if you go down south, there's preference for dusty teas, therefore stronger. So it does vary. So you must titrate your product as long as your supply chain allows for it to have that good complexity. That complexity is overdoing the segmentation and saying कि now there are 20 different cohorts of customers, हर एक के लिए मैं एक अलग ad दिखाऊंगा and that will give me, and I think lots of data has shown that all of that bad complexity gives you 15 to 20% incremental, purchase intent or something like that. So it's very, but the effort involved is 100 200% more. So I think we should uncomplicate life. Frankly, I don't even know the 7 P's. I think the 4 to 6 P's that I have grown up learning are most relevant. And the personalization P is the one that I would re-clarify and say keep disaggregating the country and the segments that you want to think about. As long as there is a sizable number of consumers in a cohort that you can design for and address specifically without alienating or dissatisfying somebody else, right? Like I can't have two formulations of a product in the same city state. Is very hard because it's, if let's say a brand of tea had two formulations in Mumbai and both of us went and bought different formulations and you got mine, I got yours, then it's very hard, right? So
Hmm.
I think, but if your complexity allows, and supply chain allows for that complexity, which is I'm able to deliver, like I buy Blue Tokai coffee at home and they give you personalized blend and grind size. Great.
Hmm.
Please do it as long as your scale allows you.
Talking about more complexity, right? I speak to a lot of creative people. We indie fellows in network, and um, there's a constant frustration in a bunch of creative people where they say that yeah, everything is data led now, and yeah, वो idea कभी कभी आता है. I mean, it's hard. Like sometimes you just get ideas in a shower. Um, so I wanted to know your perspective, as somebody who loved physics, did engineering, I mean, did science, and then went ahead and did market research, and you spoke so much about insights and data. Do you feel that we are living in a world where creativity is kind of getting sidelined, and we are just kind of creating data driven assets? I've heard from a lot of uh, clients actually saying, yeah, I don't care about the creative, man, like just give me 500 ads, then I'll see what works. So are we going into that world where it's just generally all about full throttle scale and execution, and is creativity dying because of data?
I think we went through that journey maybe a couple of years ago or maybe 5 years ago when that, but now more and more if you talk, and I think creativity is having a resurgence again, right? There was this period when everything became 6 second GIFs or 3 second GIFs on Meta platform because that's all consumers had attention for, and that's all. And then creativity died, saying ki you have to do something. But then even there, people realized no, actually creativity matters. You have to do something thumb stopping for the human being to stop from scrolling and say, I want to see this. So I genuinely believe in creativity. I don't think it's unimportant, but it has to be data driven. I think it's not an either or, right? Like, and goes back to all the examples that I said. It has to be data driven strategy, human driven insight, and the creative team should not know the data. They should know the human truth, and then how do I unlock the creativity? And as long as they are kept away from the data, I think they'll do their jobs well. As long as we are immersed in data to give a clear brief, we'll do our jobs well.
Awesome. I love that answer. I think I personally feel that creative people just need to understand where the data, why the data is being tracked for like what goal. Often what happens is that they get so lost in their ideas that it's very hard for them to kind of attribute why this thing will work. You'll be like, no, this is funny and this is cool and this will get a share, but they forget that there is a certain call to action. And I think that's at least one advice I have for them. But 100%, I think as much as clear the brief is, obviously it helps. So yeah, I think thanks for that. What you now kind of talk about, uh, a lot of times I get this question from D2C founders who are doing 0 to 1, where traditional marketing still is very important for the big wigs, right? It's a distribution which is, I think, a mode for a lot of the large companies, and for them mainline traditional advertising becomes very very important. And I was speaking to a few folks who also operate at scale, that digital ads don't make sense for them because the kind of products they are selling, it's hard to kind of have that CAC LTV kind of make sense. Um, so I still see, like the big FMCG companies still spending a lot on traditional and mainline. But new D2C companies are wanting to kind of have, I mean, the new FMCG companies are wanting to have this D2C approach, right? Where it's direct to consumer, they have their own websites, and they're really struggling. And I constantly see that a lot of them end up getting on these, Q-commerce now, or delivery apps, or they could sell themselves on marketplaces. So if I'm a D2C founder and I'm building, right, let's say a FMCG, fast moving consumer product, do I need to be mindful about traditional, or can I be a digital first brand? If I'm a D2C founder, keeping in mind that a lot of large FMCG companies are still investing heavily into traditional marketing, is mainline then a big important factor for me? Let's say I've raised $1 million, $2 million. Do I need to invest that into traditional marketing, or can I actually be a digital first brand?
So, okay, let me go back to the two different principles that we should operate with, right? When you're in 0 to 1, what you're trying to essentially identify is some sort of product market fit. It's very, very early stage, right? And I think the beauty is in the bigger old world, not old world, older, more established companies, that 0 to 1 was identified through a lot of market research and testing. Whereas today's entrepreneurs, thanks to funding and being a lot more bold and risk averse, etc., are willing to put it out there and test live rather than do market research, right? I think so. So there, what is the focus? It's not about reach and scale. It's about generating a rapid trial, because you want to make sure that I get quickly lots of people to try the product or the service, to know that do I fundamentally have the retention and the value, that if I now go and invest money behind to drive awareness around it, will it then keep growing? So I think that's the first question to ask. So 0 to 1, the question is not what channel, will give me reach, what will get me quickest trial. And it can vary. Like, if you go back 30 years, if somebody opened a neighborhood kirana, that's a business, that's a startup, just that it's not funded, it's a business somebody started. How would he get business? He will not go put advertising in a print ad or newspaper or TV. He'd probably go to the societies nearby and distribute flyers to say, hey, I've opened nearby. What does that do? Because he gets everyone to try it first, and then he'll get word of mouth. Maybe he's got the right assortment, pricing, etc. Then once he gets a certain traction, he knows, okay, maybe I should invest some money. If maybe back then Facebook were there, he'd do some performance ads or reach ads to get people aware about the store. So I think that's the way to think about it. So it's not about traditional versus non-traditional. Early stages, focus on whatever gets you rapid trial, and then once you know you've got good value, then start building reach. But don't do it mindlessly. Obviously, it depends on how much funding and cash you have. I would say do it prudently in certain markets, geographies first, right? To know that you're still scaling in a sustainable, healthy way. Because otherwise, what you'll have is you've invested lots of money, then you find that you have the same problem in many different places, not just in one place. So I'd say save up those big dollars for little later in the journey. And that's been my reflection back in some of the failures that I've had, where we've done too much too soon, and then we've realized we spent 10 crores in the first 3 months advertising, but we've just not got enough trial, and then it's a vicious cycle saying you need to spend more to generate the same business case that you wanted, and the management's telling you, hey, you just burnt a lot of money, you've not even delivered 50% of what you said you'll deliver, and now you're asking for more money. And now, on hindsight, I would have not done the 10 crore advertising. I would have probably first done it in select channels, generated trial, and then invest.
People get very confused. When do I know I have product market fit? Like, how many trials do I need to observe? What signals do I need to pick from my consumer? Is there any thumb rule you followed?
I mean, I haven't been part of 0 to 1 journeys in a big way, so I'm not the expert to answer this. But I've read up that there is this test that people do. I think it's called the Ellis something test, where you ask the question after you got a certain trial to all your people who tried it, saying how disappointed would you be if this product or service didn't exist. And the person who invented this found that, and he studied this over lots of startups and found that if that, the scale, it's a 5 point scale saying, and the last scale is I'd be very disappointed if that number is not 40% and above, you've still not got product market fit. So I think that 40% rule is something that I've heard is popular and useful too.
Awesome. This is like a very nice articulate definition. Thank you so much. I think this will help a lot of people. I want to now ask you two questions on behalf of the community. So, we talk to a lot of boutique agency founders, production houses. We also represent a lot of independent consultants, and a lot of them would want to work with a lot of the brands you've worked with. So, what really separates a great agency from a good agency, as per you?
I think first, agency's job is to make sure they have great creative, right? Unconstrained creative, unconstrained to the extent that within the domain of the brand, you don't want to be. Everybody wants a brief which is so open that do not constrain me by the brand. But I mean, you have to be real, true to the brand, assuming it's an established brand. If it's a new brand, then you shape it together with the brand owners. So I think first is build great creative talent. I think this goes back to that question saying, can I come up with great ideas? But you need strategy people who are able to translate that client, sometimes complicated brief, or work with the client to have a sharp, objective, and simple brief that creative people can do justice to. I think those are the two. I think the faff often happens when you try and get a lot of these planning folks to do 10 slides before the creative team will present the script, and then you realize that the script and the slides have no connection. Somebody has invested time, and I'm pretty certain in many cases even the creative team didn't care. तुम लोग बनाओ अपना slide, हम लोग creative करेंगे, and then later we'll figure out where the two shall meet. I think that genuinely is a waste of time and resource even for the agency and for the clients. So I'd say what separates the great agencies are great creative talent and somebody, whether you call it account or planning or whatever, people who are able to hold the business perspective. And I don't mean business as in they will go deep into the client's numbers and have the data at hand, etc. But just are you somebody who's here to know that will this sell what we're trying to sell or not? And meet the objective. I think that simplicity is important because otherwise it's not creative for art's sake, right? It's creative for commercial sake. So I think that balance is important. I think that's what separates the.
Awesome. I think a lot of people must be feeling uncomfortable hearing this whenever they do, because it happens so often that you divide this, you make an index, you divide the slide structure, and then you forget about linking the two. And I've sat through some pitches where I've seen that happen, and it's pretty funny. Um, um, Another question I wanted to ask you on the state of creative outsourcing right now. I think I see two things happening. One is AI, and I think I'll touch upon that later. But there's also a lot of chatter in the creative circles that it's the end of retainers. It's the end of an AOR. Companies are moving to project by project basis. Companies are doing BAU internally. So there's a lot of pressure now, or it's almost impossible for newer players to actually crack a 2-year contract with a company anymore. It's very project to project basis. um, and at the other end there's a lot of like consolidation happening. So at the bigger ones are just kind of signing long term deals, and it's just becoming very hard for newer players to actually, let's say, get brands. um, at the same time, I talk to a lot of people, and that's our model where a lot of CMOs have already said that I actually want to work with new people now. I'm wanting to have more dynamic, output, more variety in my output. So what's your opinion here? What do you think, if I'm a new agency, if I really want to kind of work with big wigs like you, um, what's the right approach for me to kind of attack clients? Is it that it's going to be ideas and projects, or do I need to think of solutions which are retainers?
I think retainer slash product is the business model. So I would, and obviously, the retainer is a healthier, happier marriage, right? And generally, clients tend to invest into that marriage once they know that you cross the engagement hurdle, which means you've spent time with that team, they've delivered consistently, and then you say, yeah, this is a relationship that I value and nurture because I think the longer I nurture it, the more value I will get out of it as the brand owner. So I think so. I wouldn't start from can I get a retainer. I would start from think of it like a consumer thing, right? It's the same in consumer driven categories. There's so much choice, and you're always wondering how is there space for another brand. And then the ones who come up and succeed are the ones who found a new problem or an unsolved problem and said, "Hey, I'm going to solve this," and put a value to it. And then suddenly that market explodes, and 10 new brands will come into that space, right? That's how it works. So I think even the young agencies who succeed are the ones who solved unsolved problems for clients or gone to clients who are not in a place where their marriage is happy. So I think the I know big is where the money is, but the route to big is to nurture the small into big rather than go straight to the big ones and say, hey, you know, can you give me an opportunity? By the way, and that makes sense. But and I've had people come to us in pitch. But what where I've liked it is where they've said, hey, I think this is an interesting problem you have. I have an idea and I want to pitch it to you, and here's where it is. I obviously there are challenges. I know there are people who have used that sometimes, but I find that refreshing to say somebody is willing to stick their neck out and their work out to give. It's like free sampling in product, right? Saying I'm giving you try
Right.
it, try me, and if you like me, then I'm happy to commercialize the relationship. I think so. That is important. Otherwise, in today's cluttered world with so many partners out there, both big and small, it is hard for the big brands to come and then bet on the smallest, newest agency, right? It's hard.
Absolutely. I think some solid advice, and I can kind of vouch for this that um, we've tried this and it really works. I think that's a great way to differentiate instead of just sending LinkedIn DMs or very long emails, which will never get any attention from the right people. Talking about AI, Ashwath, so people are saying AI is going to enable one person billion-dollar companies, and if I can kind of look at that same example, I'm imagining there may be one or two people marketing departments, one or two people agencies. Do you see that to be happening? What do you think should be a marketer's approach with respect to AI? Where can we use it, and do you think it's going to replace a lot of what marketeers and creative people do today?
Okay, think of AI as the assembly line automation that happened in manufacturing, let's say 70 to 100 years ago. Right? So, what does it do? It eliminates jobs or tasks that are menial, can be done more efficiently. That's one use case of AI. The other is it ends up if it can do things that are slightly more value adding, and I think, and I want to define that as I find AI in creativity useful as a starting point because AI, because it looks at data, it ends up connecting dots that the human physically cannot connect. And I remember we did this experiment for the first time, and we were all blown by this AI buzz thing, about I think a year and a half ago, where we were asked to create a toothpaste pack design using the prompt tool. and we created and we were trying to create some pineapple flavor. Just we were having fun, right? So we were trying to do this. The design that came out, I can guarantee you, no creative person would have ever started even there, because it connected some island and some drink and something. It didn't look like a toothpaste pack, but we loved it, saying, "Hey, this is what will stand out on shelf," because
Mm,
it looks so anti-category. Now, could I have
mm,
taken that design as is and run with it? The answer is no. Ultimately, a human would have had to come and finish it. But I think we can leverage, and I've seen good creative people do that. They use Chat GPT for just getting some thought starters, some,
yeah.
and it sparks something, and then they leap off it to say, "I've written a whole story around it. I've built something around it." So I think AI can be used to create the seed, and then the right creative person should nurture that into the plant, and therefore the output. That's one value adding space. So do I think that part will eliminate jobs or people? I don't think so. Where it
Mm,
can have an impact is wherever you are doing things inefficiently. Can I simplify? It obviously therefore saves cost and money and resource, and that's something that, I mean, I don't have doomsday predictions on how much it's going to eliminate, but it's certainly going to happen. Like, I can think of analysis and stuff. I remember in my journey earlier, used to be softwares you had to run, and our time Excel organize, and then suddenly there was this tool that HUL had, which was called Livewire, where literally you could give a query and the data tables will come up. And today we're talking about, you can give the query and it'll throw you the answer, saying you've lost market share because of XYZ. But I think that's fabulous, right? The amount of time and energy it saved for me to do 2 3 days of analysis to one query, and I've got the answer in. Yeah.
100%. I think data analysis is like magic for me. It works like almost perfectly, and the biggest villain of a creative person is the creative block, right? The blank paper or the blank artboard. And I think AI is like the best to solve that. You just put some stuff and it'll start giving you bad ideas, but one of them will spark something, and then you can build on that with AI, and then it'll lead to something else.
Yeah.
um, we are almost at time. We're actually at time. So I want to jump into asking you the last question now, Ashwath. So I wanted to ask you your advice to young marketers, but I think I'm pretty clear with that. You said that experiment when you're young and do multiple things, go wide. So maybe I'll ask you a question, on top of it, that let's say I know, okay, I want to experiment. And if I'm a young marketer, what all are some exciting areas I should experiment in? I think I always believe if you build in the frontier, your chances of succeeding are very high. I spoke to a lot of CMOs today who did digital when it was 1% of the marketing spend. And now, they understand it so well, it kind of really helped them grow. So, any exciting trends, opportunities which you feel, young people should experiment on? I'd love to hear that as your, final answer.
No, before I get to the experimentation bit, because I think then that becomes a buzzword and people tend to run after the shiny toy. I think what are the fundamentals that they should spend 60, 70, 80% of their time doing is be obsessed about consumers and customers and solving their problems. Ultimately, that's the job of a marketer. I think if we shouldn't define it, maybe we should rechristen it from brand manager to consumer manager. Right? You're managing consumers. You're supposed to keep them happy. I think that's the first thing. So don't don't shy away from that. And obviously, with that means data analysis. Obviously, all of that. I think on the marketing things, things are always going to keep evolving and change. If you go back 40, 50 years, print was everything. So everyone was writing long copy. Then suddenly radio happened. So suddenly people had to make it musical and shorter. And then TV happened. So people had to make it 45 seconds. And then it became 30 seconds. And then it became a GIF. And then now there's long form coming back. And, so things will go through. What I would say is, as long as you understand the reason and the principle behind it and experiment and then learn, it doesn't mean everything works for everybody. Even today there are companies who don't do some stuff and are surviving and doing well. There are companies who are doing only that and doing well. So there is no perfect answer for everybody, because it depends on what's the customer you're after, their media consumption, how it works for them, your category dynamics, etc. Right? So
Correct.
I'd say be mindful. Don't run after every shiny toy. But if you're running after a shiny toy, ask yourself, what it can unlock for you. And if you genuinely believe it can, right, and stay open to that, then yes, do put money behind it, try it, and if it doesn't work, it's okay. It's I think it's fine. So I mean, maybe it sounds like a cliched answer, but don't experiment for the sake of experimentation. Experiment because you think, and I mean, the definition of an experiment is that, right? You know, it can either fail or succeed. So, as long as you've got a good enough hypothesis of why it can succeed, go for it.
Awesome. Yeah, I think, never just like follow a fad, do your own research. I think
Yeah.
that's extremely critical. And I love what you said in the start, right? I think you were like, instead of thinking of what's the future and what will change, like, let's think of what will not change. And I think customer obsession is something which I think will never be something you'll ever have to change, because that is what I think will help you make a mark. So, some solid advice, Ashwa. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you had a good time.
Oh, I loved it. Enjoyed the chat. Thank you so much, Kamal, for having me.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much. I was really looking forward to it. I think Beat Unilever, Beat Swiggy, I think some iconic brands which a lot of people, would want to work at. So thanks for unpacking so many insights today. And for everybody who's tuned in so far, if you'd like another marketing leader like Ashwath join in soon, please like, share, and subscribe. We'll have another episode coming out very, very soon. Thank you so much.